Thank you very much for being here. This is wonderful. I know that it's hard to listen to somebody in English for 2 times in a row, so it's very nice of you to be joining me. What I'm going to talk about is racial equity in school discipline. And this would be a very interesting presentation because I do this presentation a lot, and this is the work that I do in the U.S., and this context is a little bit different, and so it'll be interesting to see what things match up with and what things don't. But I think that we probably have some similar challenges and some different challenges, maybe a little bit more intense in the U.S. I have the big honor of being able to lead a disproportionality work group. So I'll describe a few things. So sometimes we talk about disproportionality, meaning, are people familiar with that term, disproportionality? Okay, so disproportionality means an increased extent of, especially when we talk about disproportionality in school discipline, that means that there are uneven levels of school discipline or behavior incidents or suspensions or responses to students that depend on the race or ethnicity of the student. So sometimes we talk about disproportionality and sometimes we talk about equity, which would be the opposite of disproportionality. And if you have other questions, you should definitely ask because I'll use lots of nerdy words. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a few activities, and then I'm going to talk about what we're using in the U.S. to begin to address this challenge and increase equity. I like to start with some ground rules. Number one, like I said before, ask questions. I have a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old at home, so I am used to being interrupted. It's perfectly fine. One thing I have to tell people in the U.S. is to speak your truth. And knowing that your truth or your perspective or your experience, we all know our own experiences, and your experience or your truth may be different from someone else's, and that's perfectly fine. And we have to speak and listen and honor that. And also, I might move this over, get comfortable with discomfort. It's a little confusing, but this is what we sometimes call a touchy topic and something difficult for us to have conversations about. And that's part of why this is a big challenge, and it's an important way to have steps. If we don't talk about it at all, then we can't move forward. And so that means sometimes you may feel like the dog on the left, or you might feel like the dog on the right, and that's okay. We'll be fine there. But what I want to do is I want to start by asking you a few questions. And these actually come from a researcher in the U.S. named Patricia Devine. And so what I want you to do is you're going to hold your hand up, and then you're going to answer on 5 to 1. And 5 is I absolutely agree, and 1 is I completely disagree. And then 2, 3, and 4 are somewhere in between. Does that make sense? So you put your hands up and say, on a scale of 1 to 5, I am aware of my personal biases. 5 meaning I agree, 1 meaning I totally disagree. And don't worry, I don't know many of you, so biases are, that would be a good question. Dankjewel. This is good. This is good. There is going to be a little Dutch in this presentation, but I'm not going to say it because I'll say it wrong. Okay, number 2, I am concerned about the consequences of
vooroordelen.
Vooroordelen?
And to judge is vooroordelen.
Vooroordelen. Gotcha. Okay, good. I won't say it again because I'll get it wrong. Okay, number 2, so I'm concerned about prejudice. Okay. Number 3, I have effective strategies for reducing prejudice in educational decisions. Most people in the U.S. answer 1. for that one. So you feel a little bit more confident. That's probably good. What your answers generally say is if you feel like you are pretty high on the first one, very high on the second one, and low on the third one, that, at least according to some research, says you're ready to start learning about some strategies for moving forward, so that you already have a little bit of a commitment. And probably because you're choosing this session as opposed to other sessions, you want to know a little bit more and you're ready. So we're going to do a few little activities to talk about. It's interesting. Prejudice and bias they're slightly different, and so a bias. I'm trying to think of the difference in definition of bias. Just means that you are steered in one direction as opposed to the other, but doesn't necessarily say. Sometimes prejudice is a close connection to it, but it's slightly different. It means that when I'm driving in my car, sometimes the car wants to go a little bit to the left, or my bicycle pulls a little bit to the right, or something like that.
More unconsciously?
Unconscious, exactly. That's what we'll talk about here as well. So we'll talk about some definitions. So what I want to do is do a little activity with you. Okay, so take a look at these squares here, and tell me how many people believe that this color is the same as this color. Raise your hand. We have one person here. Okay, what I want you to do, and we'll see if it looks different on the projector. Take your left thumb and hold it over so that you're covering the arrow here and this whole section here. So cover it with your thumb, this whole section, and then look. That's kind of neat, huh? It's the same color.
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
Because in the first slide, thank you.
Yes.
This first question, I think it's hard to answer because you don't know what you don't know. So you think
that's right.
You think you don't have biases or you're aware of them, but you cannot know.
Absolutely. Yes.
That's
and
why I didn't raise my hand, because I cannot know.
No, that's a very good point. And we'll talk about that, because what we're really talking about is that there's a difference between conscious and unconscious bias. And this really has to do with unconscious. We don't know. But what we do is we're looking all the time. Our brains are wired to look for different connections. And especially when things are a little confusing, our brains jump to conclusions without often us being there. And there's no reason why. There's nothing wrong or right with saying that these are two different colors or that these are two the same colors. Nobody is a bad person because they didn't see that they were different. But it just has to do with the tricks that our brains play on us. And so I'm going to do a few more of these activities. Another one is called the SWP task. So I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but I'll bet you have if I show you the picture. What a SWP, here's Stroop. He looks like he's concerned about your bias too, but that's okay. What you'll see is there are going to be words that are presented on the screen, and they're going to be in different colors. And it's a test of how quickly you can make quick decisions, right? So you've seen this probably. And the idea is that it's easier to look at this and say, and I'm sorry, this is going to be in English, but I'll get a second one in Dutch in a second. Okay, that you say that this color is green, thank you. And this color is red, exactly, but it's a little harder to do that because we have this bias that's there. Okay, so we're all going to read this together. We're going to read it, not the words, but we're going to say what the colors are, and we're all going to do it together. And if you need to say the colors in Dutch, don't do it. You gotta do it in English. Okay? Okay. You'll see why in a second, because it'll be different. And I don't even know if this will work for you. But anyways, okay. So let's all do this together. Okay? So red, green, blue, yellow, pink, yellow. You good? Blue, red, green, brown. Okay, that was good. This one was pink, but it might be hard to see. It's okay if you call it purple. We're all right with that. and then this is brown here. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do a whole page of these words. I know, this is going to be hard to do. You think, oh, man. And what I want you to do is we're going to put, I've got a little timer that goes up here. So I want you to go across the page and do this out loud as quickly as you can, and then when you're done, just look up at the time up there, okay? Okay, so you ready? You're going to say the color of the word in English. Okay, ready? Begin. I'll do it too. Okay, red, green, blue, yellow, pink, orange, blue, green, blue, white, green, yellow, orange, blue, white, brown, red, blue, yellow, green, pink, yellow, green, blue, red. Very good, very good. So the average English speaker does in about, native English speaker does that in about 12 seconds. And the average here is about 14, which is good because most of you, English is not your first language. So that's very good. And I think everybody finished in time, right? At least the people who are saying it out loud. Okay, so going to do the exact same thing, okay? All you're going to do is you're just going to say the color of the word. We'll have the counter up at the top, and I will do it too with you. Okay, begin. Green, yellow, white, pink, orange, blue, red, yellow, green, blue, red, blue, green, red, pink, blue, yellow, pink, yellow. Did anybody finish? I did not finish. A few of you finished. You're very fast. In the nick of time, in 20 seconds. So most people do not finish in 20 seconds. Okay? Even though it's the same thing. But why? There's something different about it, right? So the reason why we can do the first one so fast is we're used to looking for patterns. So these are all our neurons in our brain, but that's distracting, so I'll take it away. So that when we've got to make very quick decisions, our brains are set for us to make very quick decisions. And this comes from survival. This comes from having to do many, many things at one time. And it makes things much more efficient if some of the things that we do are automatic. So these are called automatic associations. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do a second one. And this is a test called the implicit association test. Anybody heard of the IAT? Okay, that's all right. You are all going to do something like one. So this is you can go to this website and you can actually take it. And there are about 100 or more different kinds of implicit association tests. And what it does is it tests our connections with certain beliefs and attitudes and social groups. So what I did is I took this, and I can't say that I did a very good translation, but this is a mock-up, a similar thing to the gender career IAT. Okay? At least I've gotten it a little bit. So here's what it's going to do. We're going to test our association of men or masculinity with career or job outside the home, and women more with family. Okay? So here's what it's going to look like. You're going to see this on the screen. And what you're going to get, you've got, there's always going to be a word that shows up here. And the word is either going to be somebody's name. And these are all set up for Dutch names. So this is Jan, right? And that is, I'll just say man-like. Thank you. Man-like, right? And so then we also have family on this side and career on this side. Okay, so what you're going to do is you need to have your lap free and available, and your hands need to be empty. Okay? So what you're going to do is when this word comes up, and this one is Jan, and that's a man's name, so you're going to slap your right knee, or your right leg. Okay, so these are all practice ones. And we'll go through, and I'm going to tell you what the answer is, and then we'll do some practice, and then we'll do a timed version of this, okay? All right, so Margriet, left side, we got that one. Make sense? Okay. Right? Corporation on that side. And then family on the left side, okay? So this one, okay? These ones should be easy because you just did them. Okay. So what we're going to do is you're going to see one word a second. And all you're going to do is tap the side. And then you can laugh at my translation because the translation is not going to be perfect. You can blame Google for it. Okay. And I will do it with you, and I'm going to be much worse at it than you are. Okay. Make sense? How did you do? Well, you probably did better than me because I don't remember the words anymore. Yeah. That's okay, but you get.
Is very.
Yeah.
You're excited about it?
Yeah.
Upset about it, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Irritated. And were you irritated about the associations or irritated about how you responded?
Struggling with this exercise.
Absolutely, and that's this automatic association, right? So it's not saying it's good or bad, it's just talking about a bias, which we might say is actually bad or is actually good in this situation. But yeah, so this is not necessarily me saying what I believe in, it's saying what the, how do you say it? So most people in society have a moderate to strong association of career and men and family and women. Good or bad, I won't I'll comment on that. That's not good, but exactly. Yeah, so I apologize for, remember, we got to get comfortable with discomfort, right? So you're doing a very good job of speaking your truth. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do the exact same thing, similar words, but all we've done is we still have feminine over here and masculine over here, but we've just changed so career is over here and family is over here. That's it. So you're going to get the same idea, right? Okay, so we're going to do this together. We're going to do practice again. Okay? Geert. Hannah. Kinderen. If you're maybe if you're a toddler teacher, then it's different or something like that. Okay? Okay. Make sense? Okay, so same thing. Look at the sides and begin. Keep going, try to catch up. Okay, so what did you notice?
Easier.
You found it easier. You found the second one easier. Some people do. Most people find the second one harder. That's all right. See, everybody is a little bit different, right? And the more attuned we are to some of these, sometimes the faster we are, and sometimes the slower we are. But there's a difference between our automatic association and actually our values, right? So sometimes we have an automatic association or bias that does not line up with the way that we think we should feel, or the way we actually even do feel, or that the way that society treats us. And that's the whole point of that. So let's take just a second to do a little discussion with somebody next to you, a couple people next to you. how might your patterns of response, how you responded to that, affect real-life decisions that you might make, or real-life interactions with people? So go ahead and do a little brief discussion here. So come back in 30 seconds. Good, good, I'm glad. Oh, wow. Thank you. Okay. So I'll come back together in 5, 4, 3. I should have learned to count down from 5 in Dutch, and then that would work very well. What do you think? How might this silly little test that we did affect how we act in the real world?
I think when I make a decision on a pattern, for me it can feel good, but for the other one it could be not good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and so my personal response to that might be different from somebody else's. And if I make an assumption that everybody else feels the same way that I do, then that might lead to challenges, right?
Yeah.
Margriet.
There was an example, there's a discussion right now about white privilege.
Aha.
Students were interviewed, students who were colored, who had a different color,
Mm-hmm.
and they were interviewed whether they experienced that. And one of those boys said, if I'm in the train, nobody sits next to me. It will be, there will be space until everything else is taken.
Mm-hmm.
And well, we just discussed that. Do you think they are prejudiced? Do they have prejudice? Or is it the automatic response of people thinking, well, there's another space left?
Mm-hmm.
So is it thinking and doing, or automatic response and doing?
That's actually a very good example, because one of my colleagues who does this research actually uses who you sit next to on the bus as an example of for many people, a low consequence decision, like they don't feel like it's that important. And so that pattern you see all of the time. And so who you sit next to doesn't necessarily make for a big change in life. So you don't really care. So you just sit next to whoever. And you might think, oh, well, this might make me feel uncomfortable or something like that. And you don't even think about it, because you just sit down and you just end up sitting next to somebody who looks more like you than different from you.
They've done this research with people who they hurt. They stick a pin in their cheek, and then they measure your brainwaves. And if I, as being white, would see an Asian being stuck with a needle, my brain hardly responds. And if a white person gets stuck with the needle, my brain responds.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, because I don't mind Asians. I think
Yeah?
they would ask me, even verbally, which one do you find worse? I'd say none.
Yeah,
To
same.
hurt somebody. But my brain says something different.
I'm married to an Asian.
So I'll tell you, this is sort of giving away some of the work, but we're talking as a group here. One of the things that's very interesting, so there's something called the black-white IAT. And what that does, instead of career and gender, it's faces of black and white people and judgments of words that are good or bad or pleasant or unpleasant. And it's very surprising it's often, people find themselves surprised about it when they take it. So when I took that test, it showed moderate preference for white faces over black faces, which was a big shock to me. Very surprising.
In my classroom, when I get a new class every year, previous teacher says, yeah, that boy is a very busy boy, and I judge.
Yeah.
I see the same as they say. How can I be blank?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we don't want to give everybody a blank slate because some students need more help at the beginning, but we do have to watch out about making sure to make our own decisions with that. But tying back to what you were describing before, when I work, especially when I work in places like Texas or Maryland, and the most fascinating thing is when I'm working with black teachers and they find that they have moderate or strong implicit biases for white over black faces. It is a big shock, a big surprise, and it's not. We have to watch out about putting too much of a value judgment on that, unless it actually affects the way we behave. And so that's what we'll continue to talk about here. Please.
Yeah, I think for the student it's the same. When I have a Moroccan boy, I'm a female teacher. He doesn't want to take authority, and I think he is stuck in a pattern as well, because male people they have authority, female people don't have authority. So that's why he responds to me as well.
So we have both gender and race connecting.
Cultural thing. I think it's a cultural thing.
Yeah, but it's a pattern. He's stuck
It's
into
a pattern, absolutely.
And we're sort of moving toward sort of, okay, well, what do we do about this? And it's important for us, and well, I'll keep moving forward with some of this, and then we'll end up getting to it. I want to show a couple more slides on implicit bias, just so you can see what this looks like. So implicit bias is different from what we would call explicit bias or overt bias. So overt bias would be racism. We can use different words. And then explicit bias might be more like prejudice if we act on those. But implicit bias is a little different in that it is unconscious or automatic, meaning that we do not think about it before it happens. It's the pin prick in the cheek. We don't really have control over this thing. It just is just the thing that appears in our head. And we have to watch out about if we end up acting on it without thinking about it. It's based on stereotypes. We've talked about a few stereotypes here already. We all have levels of implicit bias, even those who are affected by it. Some more than others, but overall, we all have these implicit biases against other individuals. Generally not our values, not in line with our values. So we may have a very strong feminist who may still score high on that career gender association. And that doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, I didn't know that I wasn't a feminist. I didn't know that I was a part of the oppressive regime, because these are different. So we have to think about conscious versus unconscious as something different because they work differently. And implicit bias is more likely to influence some very specific kinds of decisions. Snap decisions, so decisions that we've got to make right away. So we just did a few activities of snap decisions. Or decisions where it's ambiguous, what's the right way of doing things. So it's a little unclear about the exact way to go. There's a gray area in between. So there's nothing, so Marguerite talked about sitting on the bus. There's nothing right or wrong about where you sit on the bus. You know, it's not like that's blatantly racist or blatantly accepting. It's just sitting on the bus. So here's a few more studies I'll show you really quickly. This is a study of implicit bias in attractiveness, where real estate agents, people who buy and sell houses. So this is people who sell houses. They took, in one city, they took pictures of real estate agents who sold houses and apartments. And then they took people in another city and asked them to rate their attractiveness from 1 to 10. Not saying who they were, not saying any position, and found that those who were rated as more attractive sold houses for more money. Also, height. This would be sort of interesting in the Netherlands, just because it's a little bit different. But in the US, correcting for gender and correcting for age, an inch of height is worth about 600 euros more every year in salary.
We would be very rich in the Netherlands.
You would. All you need to do is move to the US, and then you would be just fine. I'm going to show you another one just really, really quickly. This has to do, well, I might just skip this one, but this is implicit gender bias in math performance. And I'll just share with you really quickly. What they did is they split individuals who were in business school, so who are in graduate school to become business people, men and women, and people who are good at math and not good at math. And what was interesting is then they said, okay, you're an employer and you get to pick one of two people to be your employee. And they actually got paid real money if they picked people who would do math problems. More math problems meant you got paid more money. And overall, people were less likely to pick women, even though women did exactly the same performance on the test, even when they told them what their score on the test was. They would do it again. And this is the likelihood that when they picked the wrong person, they picked a guy instead of a woman. And the thing that's interesting is that bias was still there, whether it was men choosing, whether it was women choosing, whether it was women who were good at math and women who are not as good at math. Everybody still made the same mistakes. Okay. So I really like this quote. I don't know if it's as useful here, but Nicholas Kristof is a reporter for the New York Times, a columnist, I should say. And he has this quote that I think is really, really helpful. The challenge is not a small number of twisted white supremacists, but something infinitely more subtle and complex. People who believe in equality, but who act in ways that perpetuate bias and inequality. So that's the difference between explicit bias and implicit bias. That I have yet to meet somebody who goes into education with the core purpose to make sure that their white male students do better than their female students, right? Or students of color. So there's this very interesting book about this called Blind Spot, and the full title of it, which I think is really useful, The Hidden Biases of Good People. One of the challenges with talking about race in education is, at least in the US, so people feel like if you say, oh, are you calling me a racist? Then that's sort of the conversation ender. Then everyone crosses their arms and says, I'm not a racist because I'm a good person, because I believe in equality. So this idea of talking about implicit biases has been really helpful in helping people understand that we might make the wrong decision sometimes, not consciously, but we still do it. So it's not like getting people off of the hook. for it. We're still responsible for it.
It's not about you can't change it, I think. You
There's,
have to be aware.
that's right. So,
It's such a primitive response. I don't think you can really change it.
most of the research in terms of,
When you're
Yeah.
yes,
Maybe you can't change that.
exactly. Most of the research on changing people's racial biases shows, unfortunately, that you are just as likely to strengthen biases as you are to weaken them. But you can change your behavior, your response to it. So I have my automatic reaction, and then I say, wait a minute, that's not in line with my values. What I want to do is I want to make sure to move forward. So I'm going to skip past a few things. These are stats from the US. I don't think we need to show that. Implicit bias predicts all sorts of things, including in the US police officers' use of force. Arbitrators are like judges determining cases in favor of men versus women. Pediatricians, so children's doctors, recommending less pain medication for black children compared to white children with the same symptoms. And then this one is very interesting, and it's going to be, it's complicated, but this is research from the Netherlands. You can see, there's your biases showing up, implicit bias, you expected this to be Dutch, and it is, that teachers' expectations for minority students, and those were students who were Moroccan and Turkish, they expected them to have worse career outcomes, and that level, their level of implicit bias, also predicted the achievement gap for students in their classrooms. The more implicit bias, the bigger of a gap in actual achievement that students had.
That. I know someone who he was father of a team where my son played, and he's Turkish, and he told me his education story. He came to the Netherlands when he was about 9 years old, and he went to some kind of transition class we have in the Netherlands, and all of his teachers said, well, VMBO, which is the lowest level, that would be perfect for you. Only one teacher said, no, there's more potential in you, and I know you can perform on a higher level, so I would recommend you to go to the HAVO. And it turned out that he was very good. He went to the university, and now he's a manager of 500 people somewhere in a big company.
Mm-hmm.
So what would have happened if all those teachers would have said, no, this is the place where you have to go.
Mm-hmm. And so there's research that just came out this year looking at income inequality and achievement inequality across the world, and found that the Netherlands was actually the biggest, because of the system of assigning students to different tracks, we would say, had the most indirect effects. So students didn't come in academically as different, but by the end of their time, I mean, think about it. I mean, the difference between the number of years of school that you actually get, based on what that decision is huge. 1 year, 2 years, and then beyond that. So that's certainly a big decision in terms of thinking about biases and what we do. Please.
Just because I'm very proud, Linda van den Berg is our colleague. It's Linda van den Berg who did this.
Yes.
Yes, the Dutch article.
Absolutely.
That's that's nice.
Keuvenaar.
Linda Keuvenaar. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
that-
that's nice.
Yeah, I just had the first one, but yes, it's from Red.
Maiden name is van den Berg, but she's married to
Keuvenaar.
Ah, there you go.
know her as Linda Keuvenaar. Yeah.
Ah, there you go. Okay. So now you say, oh, I trust it more because I know her. I'll show you this really quickly, and then I want to get quickly to solutions. Anybody remember Hurricane Katrina was about just 10 years ago in the U.S. These were pictures that were posted to a journalism photo site. So people take pictures and then post it online, and you can purchase the picture. News companies will purchase the picture. So it's a photo pool. And this is a picture here. A young man walks through chest-deep floodwater after looting a grocery store in New Orleans, blah, 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 blah. And then posted on the same day was this picture, which says 2 residents wade through chest-deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store. So these biases are there with us all of the time. This looks exactly the same to me. They actually have more stuff than he did. And so we've got to watch out that those are our automatic associations that we have.
In the media, it's very common.
Yes.
Differences.
Oh, absolutely, and that's what I hear from is just if you turn on the television, you see what's happening, and you think, probably the worst part about it is if you're a young Moroccan boy and you're watching the news. The only things that you really see about your culture is all negative.
A photograph of a guy after the plane crashed last year. And this guy had a teddy bear, and he was holding it. And one photograph said he has looted this, and the other photographs he's glad because he found a child's possession. It was so black and white.
Mm-hmm. So the exact same picture, but it was I'm stolen this from somebody versus I'm so happy that I can.
Yes, I can
give this
to the family so that they have something to remember it by.
Wow.
Yeah. Really impressive, I think.
Okay, so this is too depressing. We've got to move to solutions. Skip all of this. Skip all of this. Sometimes we have questions that people ask in the U.S. about, isn't it just that these kids are poor, and so that's why we see these differences, that it's really poverty, that it's not race. And poverty does play a role, but in research over many, many years, over many, many different groups of students, we see race still playing an important role in these discipline outcomes, even when controlling for income. We don't see any differences in terms of actual behavior from subgroups. And then this last question I was already describing before about, are you calling me a racist? And this is why this approach is a slightly different way of getting into that. So I kind of went through this before, that we talked about this idea that, if we're all biased, then disproportionality is, we can't change this, so therefore we can't change this here. And in reality, a broader view says, we do all still have these biases, like I was describing, like we all did a little bit earlier today. But there are actually different situations where we see more or less of an influence of bias on our decisions. So I'm going to talk through that, and there's this book that's very interesting. I did see it in Dutch at the airport, called Thinking Fast and Slow. Daniel Kahneman. I don't know what you would call it, but anyhow, you don't need to know anything about it, and I haven't even read the book myself. But I can tell you 2 parts about it. What he talks about is that there are 2 systems for decision making. And this is called a dual process model. Daniel Kahneman didn't actually come up with this. This has been just 20 or 30 years of research on this. So we have these 2 systems that are always operating for our decisions that we make. System 1 is for fast decisions. So these are automatic snap judgments, unconscious. We just make them and it happens. We don't have any time, we just do it. We've got to do it quickly. Then system 2 is different. System 2 are slow decisions. These are ones where you can pour a cup of coffee, think about it for a little bit, maybe you write down your list of pros and cons, and then make a decision. And so these are 2 are always operating, but sometimes one of them kicks in over the other one. So let me have you look at this, and we'll answer this as a whole big group here. Here are some decisions in schools. Take a look and see which ones you think are more likely to be fast decisions and which ones are more likely to be slow decisions. What do you think? Correcting a student's behavior is snap decision, yes. In fact, all of these on this side are ones that we've got to do quickly, right? And all of these ones over here, we've got some time. Sometimes in the US, we get confused and we think that kicking a kid out of school is a fast decision because we've got to do something right away. But it is not, right? We can always stop and think about it. If you can wait for 30 seconds, then it can be a slow decision, as long as we're careful about it and we don't just do the first thing that comes to our mind. Okay, so what I'm going to go through here in the last little bit are a couple points of how we can address equity within a PBS approach. And this is our website for looking at equity information. And I think you'll have these on the conference website as well, so you'll be able to see. I talked about the first one already on here. What I want to do, though, is I want to move us to moving to a few solutions. We've got some evidence that PBS does work to reduce discipline inequities. And I want to give you a few ideas for some things that you could do in your PBS systems, and then I want to finish with a little bit of a snap decision correction that we can talk about. So I'm going to skip a few of these things and show you a couple. One of the things that we think is really important, and we've done less of a good job in the US, and I think you all probably are doing or can do much better and teach us a little bit about this, is having much more of student voice and family voice in PBS systems. And so this is a survey that we've been developing where we ask students about the values at school. Do they know what the values are? Do they like the values? Are the values at school the same as they are in your home? If not, what's different? Do students usually follow the values? Do teachers usually follow the values? Big one there. Do teachers and staff regularly reward or praise other students when they follow the expectations? Do students and teacher staff praise you when you follow the expectations? And then you can ask questions about student race and then see, oh wow, what percent of our white students, what percent of our students of color are saying that somebody's noticed something good about their behavior this week? A few other ones. Most of you are familiar with creating an expectations matrix. So you've got your values and then what your values look like in all the parts of the school. This is a slightly different one called a personal matrix. So there's a school-wide matrix and then a personal matrix. We really, really like this idea, and a lot of people have started to use it. So here are your school-wide values you've got here. So safety, respect, responsibility, or whichever ones you have for your school. And then what you do is you do this as an activity with your students, where you give this to your students and you fill in what these things look like at school, and then you leave as a blank what these look like you've got at home and in my neighborhood. And what you find, and then students can fill out this, and then you can talk through it. And there's two things that you can do about this that's very, very helpful. Number one, if what we're asking students to do is totally radically different from what their student expectations are in other places, then we might say there might be a reason why we see more problem behavior. So we might change that. The other thing that we might do is we might need, when we see big differences that we still want to keep, we say, you know what, I know that there are cultural differences, but at school, we really have to be safe in this way. So what that means is we might need to do some extra instruction for students. So you'd say, yeah, I know, 30 seconds is probably too much, right? So what we've got here is, for example, be safe. So a student, we might ask students, if there's a problem, if there's a social problem, tell an adult. That is a very important thing. But they might know that if they're in their neighborhood, the safest thing that they can do is to look the other way and keep moving. And telling somebody about it is the fastest way to get beaten up, right? Yeah. And so there are times where we might say, but you know what, this is not okay. You know, don't back down. We don't want students not to back down with each other, but we might say, hey, look, you've identified that in your neighborhood, this is an important thing for you. And that's okay. What you do outside of school, you've got to make your right decisions. But at school, here's a big difference. And here's what's going to happen if you tell an adult. And here's how we're going to make sure that that keeps you safe. There's a nice little distinction. There's another one on here as well. This is a little specific expectation one. So you can have people fill this out here where it says, during independent seat work, the expectation is. At home, this looks like. At school, this looks like. Questions I have about how it looks at school, so that students can see the differences, and we can start making this a little more instructive. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to one more thing that I want us to get to. I think I've been talking a whole lot more slowly, which is a smart thing to do here. Yeah, I know you'd be like, gosh, if that's true. So those are strategies to use to improve cultural responsiveness or fit with your students and families. But those actually may not necessarily address implicit bias. So here's an intervention for implicit bias that I was describing before. And we call this a neutralizing routine. And so this is a strategy that you can use as an adult in the school building to make sure that our implicit automatic snap judgments are not the things that we do. So we ask ourselves, what I'm going to describe as something called a VDP, or vulnerable decision point is what we call it. These are specific situations where we're more likely to make a biased decision. So we've already talked about snap decisions. The other big number one that we've seen in the research, in our research and others, is when we talk about problem behavior that is subjectively defined. So it's very easy when a student is smoking, and we look and we can say, are students allowed to smoke here? I don't know. If we see a student smoking, we say, okay, that's easy. Okay, good. We can say, yep, okay, it's pretty clear. They have a cigarette in their mouth, they're smoking. But if we're talking about disrespect or disruption, that's right, that was disruption. And it was a woman, so, okay. I'm kidding. Exactly. Well, that's what I was talking about. So when I'm teaching, for example, and I hear students walking down the hall and they're a little louder than usual, so this is a very good example. This is a possible vulnerable decision point for me, because I'm upset that my classroom is getting disrupted, and I run outside and I look at the first thing I see when I see a student, especially if I don't know them as well. I see their gender, I see their color. And if I'm trying to make a snap decision because I've got this class of 40 people in here who I'm trying to teach, that might be a vulnerable decision point for me, right? Okay. So what we do is we ask ourselves, maybe this is one of those situations, or am I really tired right now? Am I not thinking straight? Because that's another possible vulnerable decision point. And so what we say is, let's have an alternative response that we're going to do instead. So here's this is a description of what this looks like. Anybody familiar with these 4 boxes on here? Mm-hmm. Yes, a few? Okay. So this is actually a description of my behavior teaching the class. And what this says is, if I haven't had a lot of positive interactions with the student and I'm really tired, then I might be more likely that when a student makes loud complaints about work, that I could view this as good feedback on how well I'm differentiating instruction for students, or I could view that as defiance. And if it's defiance, then I send a student to the office. Go to the office. That's not okay. You can't do that in here. And the student gets out of class. I get out of the interaction. We're done. Exactly. Problem solved, we think. So what we're trying to do is create a little space in here. So we ask ourselves, hey, is this one of those vulnerable decision points? Is it subjective? Is it behavior in the hallways? Is it for a student who is Moroccan or Turkish? And then if so, I'm going to do something instead of sending the student to the office. And my alternative response might be something like, see me after class. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to disrupt me automatically excluding a student, because that's the first thing that comes to mind. So we actually have a little bit of research on these kind of neutralizing routines. And what they say is it's not the exact thing that you do that makes a difference, but they should be if-then statements, meaning if this is defiance in the classroom, then I should do this instead. They should be brief, because remember, this is a snap decision that we're trying to replace. There should be clear steps, it should be doable, and it needs to be something that stops my automatic response. And so we originally thought that maybe the whole school would come up with one together, and that would be our team neutralizing routine. But really, when it comes down to it, is that some of these may be very personal to us. And we've got to have something that works for us. So what we've done is I've gone through and working with school teams in coming up with possible neutralizing routines here. So it might be something like see me after class. It might be just taking a deep breath. It might be waiting until the end of class to think about what to do. There's all sorts of different things. You might use, if your school is using a cool down routine, like a cell curriculum that has that teaches students what to do when I'm upset. One of the best ways to get students to actually using it is to model it for them, right? So when a student does something that gets on my nerves, I can say, okay, I'm going to do my whatever it is, I'm going to do my turtle breathing. I'm going to take my 3 steps, 3 countdown from 3. And you show that to all the students. And then the students go, oh, that thing that they taught me to do for, from 2 to 2:30 on Tuesdays, that actually can work other times too. Amazing. Right. So it matters less which one you pick. So I walk people through and they actually decide something they're going to try and test it out and see how it works. And then we've got some, I'm running out of time, but some evidence that it actually does work and has made a difference in schools. And I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but to show that it actually does, that it can work. So let's see. There we go. There's a picture of the ocean. So what questions do you have? I have to watch out because I know I got my 5-minute warning 3 minutes ago.
A few slides back, there were 5 ideas.
Yes. The 5. So it's an if-then statement. It's brief, clear steps, doable, and then interrupts the chain or slows down the decision making. Those are the key ones. And so I thank you very much. I want to make sure that we don't take too much time, but I would love to talk about this afterwards with anybody or over lunch and hear a little bit about how this works, particularly for the Dutch context.